In an emotional revelation that has stunned the metal world, Tony Iommi has broken his 47-year silence about a deeply guarded secret that Ozzy Osbourne shared with him just days before his death on July 22, 2025. The legendary Black Sabbath guitarist, speaking exclusively from his Birmingham home, has finally disclosed the most profound and shocking confession his longtime friend and bandmate ever made to him. What Ozzy revealed during their final private conversation will forever change how the world understands the true foundation of heavy metal and the hidden forces that drove the creation of some of the most influential music ever recorded. Iommi, visibly shaken as he recounts the conversation, explains that Ozzy had called him on July 18, 2025, requesting an urgent face-to-face meeting at the Osbourne family home. "I could hear something different in his voice," Iommi recalls, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he speaks. "In all the decades I'd known him, through all the chaos and madness, I'd never heard Ozzy sound so desperate." He said, "Tony, I need to tell you something I've carried for 57 years, something that will change everything you thought you knew about Black Sabbath, about our music, about why we were chosen to create what we created." The relationship between Iommi and Osbourne spans over 5 decades, from their teenage years in working-class Birmingham through the creation of Black Sabbath and beyond. They had been childhood friends who had grown up just streets apart, both escaping the grim industrial landscape of 1960s Birmingham through their shared love of music. "We were just kids when we started," Iommi reflects. "We had no idea we were about to change the world. We were just 4 lads from Aston trying to make some noise and maybe earn enough money to get out of the factories." Their bond had been forged in the grimy rehearsal spaces and youth clubs of Birmingham, where they had spent countless hours jamming together, dreaming of something bigger than the factory jobs that seemed to be their destiny. Iommi remembers those early days with vivid clarity. Ozzy was always different even then. There was something about him that set him apart from the other singers we knew. He had this intensity, this connection to the music that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just talent or ambition. What made Ozzy's final revelation so extraordinary was not just its content, but the circumstances under which it was shared. Iommi arrived at the Osbourne home to find his old friend in the same bedroom where he would pass away just 4 days later, weakened by Parkinson's disease, but with eyes that burned with an intensity that reminded Iommi of their early days together. He looked at me and said, "Tony, before I die, you need to know the real reason Black Sabbath exists. You need to know what really happened on that night in 1968 when we wrote our first song." The room itself seemed charged with the weight of decades of friendship and shared history. Photos of Black Sabbath's journey lined the walls, images from their first gigs in dingy Birmingham pubs, shots from their breakthrough performances, pictures of them as young men conquering the world stage. But now, surrounded by these memories, Ozzy was preparing to rewrite the entire narrative of their shared legacy. According to Iommi, what followed was the most shocking conversation of his life, as Ozzy began to reveal events from their early days that completely contradicted the official history of Black Sabbath's formation. He told me that the story we've been telling for 50 years, about how we accidentally created heavy metal, how we just started playing darker music because it reflected our environment, all of that was a cover story. The truth was much stranger and more frightening than anything we ever put in our songs. The secret that Ozzy had carried for over 5 decades began with an incident that occurred on February 13, 1968, when the band was still known as Earth and was struggling to find their musical identity. Ozzy told me that on that night, something happened to him that he'd never been able to explain or understand, Iommi recounts. He said he'd been alone in his bedroom, frustrated because we couldn't seem to write anything that felt right, when suddenly the room filled with what he described as a presence. Not a person, but an intelligence, something that communicated with him without words. The description of this supernatural encounter was unlike anything Iommi had ever heard from his pragmatic working-class friend. Ozzy said the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and he could see his breath in the air, Iommi explains. But more than that, he said he could feel this overwhelming sense of ancient knowledge, like he was in the presence of something that had existed for thousands of years and understood the deepest mysteries of human existence. What Ozzy described next left Iommi speechless. According to the dying frontman, this mysterious presence had somehow downloaded complete musical compositions directly into his consciousness, songs that would eventually become Black Sabbath's first album. He said it was like having someone else's thoughts suddenly appear in his mind, Iommi explains. Complete songs, with melodies, lyrics, even specific instructions about how the guitars should sound, how the drums should be played. He said the presence told him that these songs were meant to serve a specific purpose in the world. The revelation became even more extraordinary as Ozzy described how this supernatural encounter had continued throughout Black Sabbath's early career. He told me that every major song we wrote between 1968 and 1975 had come from these sessions, for lack of a better word, Iommi reveals. He said that whenever we were struggling creatively, whenever we hit a wall, he would somehow make contact with this presence and new music would flow through him. He called it receiving transmissions. Iommi reveals that Ozzy had described these supernatural songwriting sessions in vivid detail. He said it always began the same way. He would feel a kind of electrical tingling in his head, followed by what he described as a downloading sensation, Iommi explains. The music would arrive fully formed, not as fragments or ideas that needed to be developed, but as complete compositions that he somehow knew by heart, even though he'd never heard them before. If you're already stunned by this opening revelation, hit that like button, because what Ozzy confessed next about the true purpose of their music will absolutely shock you to your core. According to Iommi, Ozzy's most shocking revelation concerned the alleged purpose behind these supernatural musical transmissions. He told me that the presence had explained to him that humanity was approaching a critical period in its development, a time when people would become increasingly disconnected from their spiritual nature. Iommi recounts, "The music we were given was supposed to serve as a kind of antidote. It was meant to help people process dark emotions, to give them a safe way to confront their fears and anger, to prevent these feelings from manifesting in more destructive ways." The confession took an even more dramatic turn when Ozzy revealed that he had been receiving specific guidance about the impact their music was supposed to have on listeners. He said the presence showed him visions of young people around the world who would find strength and healing in our songs, Iommi explains. Kids who were dealing with abuse, depression, feelings of powerlessness. Our music was supposed to give them a voice to help them feel less alone, to channel their pain into something constructive rather than destructive. These visions, according to Ozzy's account, were incredibly detailed and specific. He described seeing individual faces, particular moments when our songs would reach people at exactly the right time to prevent them from making terrible decisions, Iommi reveals. He said, he watched teenagers choose to keep living instead of ending their lives because they heard Iron Man or Paranoid at crucial moments. He saw young people channel their rage into music instead of violence because our songs gave them a healthier outlet. Iommi reveals that Ozzy also confessed to having ongoing contact with this mysterious presence throughout his solo career, explaining the continued evolution of his music and his uncanny ability to connect with audiences across different generations. He said that every major decision in his career, from leaving Sabbath to the songs he chose to record to the way he performed on stage, had been guided by these communications, Iommi discloses. He felt like he was serving as a conduit for something much larger than himself. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Ozzy's confession was his revelation about the personal cost of serving as this supernatural conduit. He told me that the connection came with a price, Iommi explains, his voice becoming quieter. He said that channeling this energy, these messages, had gradually worn away at his own sense of identity. The drinking, the drugs, the erratic behavior. He said all of it was his way of trying to cope with having foreign thoughts and emotions constantly flowing through his consciousness. According to Iommi, Ozzy described the experience as being like living with a radio in your head that you can't turn off. The constant influx of musical ideas, emotional content, and spiritual guidance had, over the decades, made it increasingly difficult for him to distinguish between his own thoughts and feelings and those that were being transmitted to him. He said there were times when he wasn't sure if he was Ozzy Osbourne or just a vessel being used by something else, Iommi reveals. The psychological toll of this supernatural connection was something Ozzy had hidden from everyone, including his closest family members. He described feeling like he was living a double life, Iommi explains. To the world, he was this wild, unpredictable rock star, but inside his head, he was constantly processing information and guidance from this otherworldly source. He said the pressure of maintaining that secret while dealing with the constant mental intrusion had nearly driven him insane on multiple occasions. The confession took another shocking turn when Ozzy revealed that this supernatural presence had also provided him with knowledge about future events, particularly those related to music and culture. He told me that he'd known about the rise of grunge, the emergence of nu metal, even the way music would be distributed through digital platforms, years before these things actually happened, Iommi explains. He said the presence would show him glimpses of how music would evolve and what role different artists would play in humanity's spiritual development. This prescient knowledge had been both a blessing and a curse for Ozzy throughout his career. He said that knowing what was coming in the music industry had helped him make strategic decisions that kept him relevant across different decades, Iommi reveals. But it also made him feel isolated because he couldn't share this knowledge with anyone without sounding completely insane. He was watching the future unfold exactly as he'd been shown, but he had to pretend to be surprised by developments he'd known about for years. Iommi discloses that Ozzy had also revealed receiving warnings about potential negative consequences if their music was misunderstood or misused. He said that while the songs were meant to heal and transform, they could also be dangerous if people focused only on the darkness without understanding the underlying message of hope and resilience, Iommi explains. He felt responsible every time someone used our music to justify violence or self-destruction, because he knew that wasn't what it was intended for. The weight of this responsibility had haunted Ozzy throughout his career, particularly during the controversies surrounding songs like Suicide Solution and various incidents where Black Sabbath's music had been blamed for negative influences on young people. He said that every lawsuit, every accusation that our music was harmful, felt like a personal failure, Iommi reveals. He knew the true purpose of the songs, and when people misinterpreted them, he felt like he hadn't done his job properly as a conduit for the healing energy. The most emotionally devastating part of Ozzy's confession involved his description of how this supernatural connection had affected his relationships with his family and bandmates. He said that the hardest part wasn't the strange experiences or the musical downloads. It was feeling like he could never be completely honest with the people he loved most, Iommi reveals. He was terrified that if he told us the truth, we'd think he was insane, or that it would somehow break the connection and the music would stop coming. According to Iommi, Ozzy had been particularly tormented by his inability to share this secret with Sharon, feeling like their entire marriage had been built on a fundamental deception. He said that every time Sharon asked him about his songwriting process or his inspiration, he had to lie, Iommi explains. He wanted desperately to tell her the truth, but he was afraid that revealing the supernatural aspects of his career would destroy everything they'd built together. The confession continued with Ozzy revealing that the supernatural presence had also provided him with insights about the other members of Black Sabbath and their roles in the larger cosmic plan. He told me that each of us had been specifically chosen for our roles, Iommi recounts. He said that my guitar playing, Geezer's bass lines, Bill's drumming, none of it was accidental. We were supposedly selected because our individual energies and talents would combine to create the exact sound that was needed to carry these spiritual messages into the world. This revelation particularly shook Iommi because it suggested that their entire career, all their creative decisions, and even their personal conflicts had been orchestrated by forces beyond their understanding. It made me question everything, Iommi admits. Were our songs really our own creations, or were we just instruments being played by something else? Had any of our success been earned, or were we just lucky enough to be chosen as vessels? The supernatural guidance had apparently extended to very specific details about the band's formation and evolution. Ozzy said that the presence had shown him exactly how our personalities would interact, how our different backgrounds and experiences would contribute to the overall message of our music, Iommi explains. He said that even our conflicts and the eventual breakup of the original lineup had been part of the plan because it would force each of us to explore different aspects of the energy we were channeling. According to Iommi, Ozzy also revealed that the supernatural presence had given him specific information about the timing of his own death and the events that would follow. He said he'd known for years that he would die in July 2025, Iommi discloses. He'd been preparing for it, making sure that everything was in place for his family and that his musical legacy would continue to serve its intended purpose even after he was gone. The most chilling aspect of this revelation was Ozzy's description of what would supposedly happen to the supernatural connection after his death. He said that the presence had told him that his role as the primary conduit was ending, but that the energy would continue to flow through other musicians who were ready to receive it, Iommi explains. He felt like he was passing a torch, completing his part of some larger cosmic plan. Iommi reveals that Ozzy had also shared specific names of contemporary musicians who he believed were already receiving similar supernatural guidance. He mentioned several artists across different genres who he said were unconsciously channeling the same type of spiritual energy that had guided Black Sabbath, Iommi discloses. He felt like the network of musically gifted conduits was expanding, preparing for whatever challenges humanity would face next. The conversation took an even more personal turn when Ozzy revealed his deepest fears about sharing this secret. He was terrified that people would dismiss everything we'd accomplished as some kind of supernatural fraud, Iommi explains. He worried that fans would feel betrayed, that they'd think our music was less meaningful if it hadn't come entirely from our own human experiences and creativity. But according to Iommi, Ozzy had ultimately decided to reveal the truth because he felt that humanity was entering a period where people needed to understand that spiritual guidance and creative inspiration could come from sources beyond ordinary human consciousness. He said that the world was becoming too materialistic, too disconnected from mystery and wonder, Iommi recounts. He felt like sharing his story might help people open their minds to possibilities they'd previously dismissed. The confession also included Ozzy's reflections on how this supernatural connection had influenced his understanding of life, death, and consciousness. He said that knowing he was connected to something larger than himself had made him less afraid of dying, Iommi explains. He felt like death was just a transition to a different form of existence, one where he might be able to continue serving the same cosmic purpose in a new way. This spiritual perspective had profoundly shaped Ozzy's approach to his final months of life. He said that he wasn't fighting death because he understood it was part of the plan, Iommi reveals. The presence had shown him that his physical death would actually amplify the power of the music he'd helped channel, that somehow his passing would make the songs more potent for future generations who would need their healing energy. Iommi discloses that Ozzy had also shared specific instructions about how this information should be revealed to the world. He wanted me to wait until after his funeral, until the immediate grief had settled, before sharing any of this, Iommi explains. He said that people needed time to process his death as a normal human event before they could handle learning about the supernatural aspects of his life and career. According to Iommi, one of the most profound aspects of their conversation was Ozzy's description of how the supernatural presence had helped him understand the true nature of creativity and artistic inspiration. He said that all genuine art comes from beyond the individual artist, Iommi recounts. Whether people are conscious of it or not, when they create something truly meaningful, they're tapping into the same cosmic source that guided our music. The only difference was that he was more aware of the process. This understanding had given Ozzy a different perspective on artistic ego and individual creativity. He said that the best artists are those who learn to get out of their own way and allow something larger to work through them, Iommi explains. He felt like his role had been to serve as a clear channel for this energy, and that his personal struggles with addiction and mental health had often been the result of his ego trying to resist or control the process. The revelation continued with Ozzy sharing his thoughts about the future of heavy metal and its role in humanity's spiritual evolution. He said that the genre we helped create was just the beginning of something much larger, Iommi explains. He believed that music in general was becoming more important as a tool for spiritual growth and healing, and that heavy metal's emphasis on confronting darkness and finding strength would become increasingly relevant. According to Ozzy's vision, the future would bring new forms of music that would be even more directly connected to spiritual healing and transformation. He said that younger musicians were already starting to receive downloads of new types of healing music, sounds, and frequencies that would help humanity navigate the challenges ahead, Iommi reveals. He felt like Black Sabbath had been the foundation, but that what was coming next would be even more powerful and transformative. Iommi reveals that Ozzy had also expressed hope that sharing this secret would inspire other musicians to be more open about their own supernatural or spiritual experiences. He said that many artists have similar stories, but are afraid to share them because of how they might be perceived, Iommi discloses. He hoped that his confession would create space for more honest discussions about the mysterious aspects of creativity and inspiration. The conversation reached its emotional climax when Ozzy shared his final message for Black Sabbath fans and the broader metal community. He said that regardless of where our music came from, what mattered was how it had affected people's lives, Iommi recounts. He wanted fans to know that every emotion they'd felt, every moment of strength they'd found, every connection they'd made through our songs was real and valid, regardless of the supernatural elements involved in their creation. According to Iommi, Ozzy's last words during their conversation were both profound and practical. He said, "Tony, promise me that you'll continue to play our songs with the same passion and commitment you always have. The source of the music doesn't matter as much as the love and energy you put into performing it. Keep the connection alive through your guitar, and the presence will continue to work through all of us." The impact of this revelation on Iommi has been profound and transformative. Learning the truth about our music has changed how I understand my entire career, he admits. It's made me realize that being a musician is more than just entertainment. It's a form of service, a way of channeling healing energy into the world. Whether you believe in supernatural forces or not, there's something sacred about the process of creating music that moves people's souls. Iommi has also struggled with questions about his own role in this alleged cosmic plan. "I keep wondering if I've been receiving guidance too, without realizing it," he explains. "Some of my guitar parts, the riffs that became the backbone of our most powerful songs, did they really come from me? Or was I also being used as a conduit? It's unsettling to think that what I've always considered my own creativity might have been something else entirely." The guitarist has also reflected on the implications of Ozzy's confession for the future of Black Sabbath's legacy. "If what he told me is true, then our music carries a responsibility that goes far beyond entertainment," Iommi explains. "Every time someone plays our songs, every time a new generation discovers our albums, they're not just experiencing rock music, they're connecting with something designed to heal and transform. That's both inspiring and terrifying." Iommi concludes his revelation with a reflection on what Ozzy's confession means for the legacy of Black Sabbath and heavy metal as a whole. "If what Ozzy told me is true, then our music was never just about rebellion or darkness," he explains. "It was about helping people find strength in their struggles, about showing them that they could face their fears and emerge stronger. That's a responsibility I don't take lightly, and it's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." If this incredible revelation about Ozzy's supernatural secret has stunned you as much as it has stunned us, please show your support by hitting that like button. Tony Iommi's courage in sharing this deeply personal and controversial information reminds us that the creative process may be far more mysterious and profound than we ever imagined, and that the music we love might serve purposes beyond our understanding.